"I've always believed that a man's car says more about him than his words ever could." That line, delivered with Burt Reynolds' signature swagger, captures everything you need to know about why he became more than just an actor. He became a cultural icon whose name is forever linked to some of the most legendary vehicles in Hollywood history. But what you might not realize is just how deeply his connection to these cars shaped an entire generation's love affair with automobiles and the freedom they represented. When you think of Burt Reynolds, what comes to mind? For some, it's that million-dollar smile and undeniable charisma. For others, it's his fearless approach to action films during an era when Hollywood was just beginning to embrace the modern action genre. But for car enthusiasts and pop culture fans alike, Burt Reynolds represents something much bigger: the perfect fusion of man and machine. Throughout his legendary career, Reynolds didn't just appear in films. He starred alongside vehicles that became just as iconic as the films themselves. These weren't random cars thrown into scripts. They were carefully chosen extensions of his on-screen persona, machines that embodied the same rebellious spirit and raw energy that Reynolds brought to every role. The 1970s and 1980s were a transformative time in cinema, and Burt Reynolds was at the absolute center of it all. He had this incredible ability to make audiences believe that anything was possible behind the wheel, whether he was evading authorities, competing in dangerous races, or simply existing as the coolest guy in the room. What made Reynolds truly special, though, wasn't just his talent as an actor. It was his genuine love for automobiles. He understood that in American culture, cars represented freedom, power, and rebellion. They were extensions of the characters he played, physical manifestations of the personas that made audiences fall in love with his films. From the moment he stepped into his first iconic vehicle on screen to his final legendary roles, Reynolds left an indelible mark on automotive pop culture that continues to resonate decades later. Let's rewind to 1973, when Burt Reynolds starred in White Lightning, a film that would establish him as the undisputed king of action cinema. In this gritty Southern drama, Reynolds played Gator McCluskey, a moonshiner navigating the dangerous backroads of rural America. The vehicle that carried him through this world: a beat-up, no-nonsense 1971 Ford Custom 500. Now, this wasn't some flashy sports car designed to turn heads. It was a working man's automobile, practical, tough, and perfectly suited to the world of bootleggers and crime that defined the film. The Ford Custom 500 was an inspired choice for Reynolds' character. This was a full-size sedan that represented American blue-collar authenticity, a car that had seen better days, but still had plenty of life left in it. When Reynolds commandeered this vehicle on screen, it became the perfect reflection of his character's scrappy determination and gritty survival instinct. The car wasn't about luxury or pretense. It was about raw functionality and getting the job done, no matter what obstacles stood in the way. Reynolds' performance in White Lightning showcased his ability to inhabit tough, street-smart characters who lived by their own rules, and the Ford Custom 500 served as the perfect companion for that journey. What made this pairing particularly brilliant was that it introduced audiences to a different side of Burt Reynolds than they might have expected. At this point in his career, Reynolds was still establishing himself as a serious action star, and the authenticity of the Ford Custom 500 helped ground the film in a real, tangible world. The car's weathered appearance and practical design suggested a character who wasn't concerned with image or appearance. He was concerned with survival and staying one step ahead of danger. This film became a turning point for Reynolds, proving that he could carry a major motion picture as an action hero, and the unassuming Ford Custom 500 deserves credit for helping establish that credibility. Just as audiences were beginning to see Burt Reynolds as the ultimate tough guy, he made a surprising choice that demonstrated his range as an actor and his willingness to take risks. In 1974, Reynolds starred in The Longest Yard, a film about a former quarterback forced to coach a team of convicts in a championship game. This movie showcased a different side of Reynolds, one that emphasized humor, intelligence, and athletic prowess. And the car that appeared in this film? The strikingly elegant 1973 Citroën SM, a French luxury vehicle that couldn't have been more different from the Ford Custom 500. The Citroën SM was a masterpiece of European automotive engineering, a car that represented sophistication, style, and avant-garde design. With its distinctive wedge shape, high-drop pneumatic suspension, and powerful Maserati engine, the SM was the kind of vehicle that only the most discerning drivers could appreciate. When Burt Reynolds drove the Citroën SM in The Longest Yard, it signaled something important. This character was educated, cultured, and capable of appreciating the finer things in life, even if his circumstances forced him into difficult situations. The contrast between the raw, working-class Ford Custom 500 and the refined, sophisticated Citroën SM revealed an important dimension of Reynolds' acting ability, his capacity to shift between different character types and make each one believable. What's fascinating about the inclusion of the Citroën SM is that it was a bold choice for a mainstream American action film. This was the mid-1970s, when French cars weren't particularly popular in the United States, and luxury European imports were still relatively rare on American screens. Reynolds' willingness to drive this distinctive vehicle demonstrated his confidence and his understanding that audiences would accept his character in any setting. The Citroën SM's presence in the longest yard also added an element of visual sophistication to the film, elevating it beyond a simple sports movie and positioning it as something. The mid-1970s and early 1980s represented the golden age of the action comedy, and no film embodied this spirit more perfectly than Cannonball Run. Released in 1981, this movie featured an all-star ensemble cast that included Burt Reynolds, Dom DeLuise, Farrah Fawcett, Roger Moore, and an incredible lineup of Hollywood legends, all attempting to win an illegal cross-country race. The vehicle assigned to Reynolds and his co-star Roger Moore, a 1978 Dodge Sportsman B200 van, a vehicle that seemed hilariously out of place in a film about high-speed racing. On the surface, it might seem like casting Reynolds in a goofy camper van for Cannonball Run was a step backward from his previous roles. But this was precisely the kind of creative risk that made Reynolds so special. He understood that sometimes the best comedic moments come from unexpected pairings, and a legendary action star navigating a cross-country race in a modest family van was comedy gold. The Dodge Sportsman B200 became the perfect vehicle for Reynolds' brand of humor. It was practical, slightly ridiculous, and absolutely perfect for the absurdist tone of Cannonball Run. What made Cannonball Run particularly significant in terms of automotive pop culture was that it showcased dozens of different vehicles competing against each other, each with its own unique character and charm. The film was essentially a love letter to American automobiles and the spirit of rebellion and competition that they represented. Reynolds' Dodge van competed alongside sports cars, luxury vehicles, and custom machines, but somehow the humble family van managed to hold its own in terms of charm and memorability. This film became a cultural phenomenon, grossing over $100 million worldwide and spawning a sequel, the Dodge Sportsman B200, despite being a comedian. If there's one film and one vehicle that defined Burt Reynolds' career and forever cemented his place in popular culture, it's Smokey and the Bandit, and the legendary 1977 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am. Released in 1977, this film wasn't just a movie. It was a cultural phenomenon that captivated audiences across the entire country and introduced the Pontiac Trans Am to millions of Americans in a way no advertisement could have achieved. Let's set the scene. Smokey and the Bandit tells the story of the Bandit, a charming bootlegger tasked with an impossible mission: smuggle 400 cases of beer from Texas to Georgia in 28 hours. It sounds simple enough, but there's a catch. A relentless state trooper known as Smokey is determined to stop him. The vehicle Reynolds chose for this cross-country adventure wasn't a sports car designed to go unnoticed. It was a brilliant, eye-catching jet-black Pontiac Firebird Trans Am with a towering gold phoenix emblazoned across the hood. This wasn't subtlety. This was pure, unapologetic style and confidence. The 1977 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am was already a remarkable piece of automotive engineering before Smokey and the Bandit came along. Powered by a 400 cubic inch V8 engine capable of producing 180 horsepower, the Trans Am represented the last generation of true American muscle cars. Its aggressive styling, complete with that distinctive hood scoop and the iconic Trans Am decals, made it instantly recognizable on any road. But it was Burt Reynolds and Smokey and the Bandit that transformed the Trans Am from a car that enthusiasts appreciated into a vehicle that the entire American public desperately wanted to own. When Reynolds sits behind the wheel of that black Trans Am in the opening scenes of the film, everything about his character is communicated without a single word of dialogue. The car's aggressive styling, its predatory front end, and its unmistakable presence on the road all work together to establish the Bandit as a figure of dangerous charisma and undeniable cool. Reynolds had an instinctive understanding of how to use the vehicle as a character development tool, and the Trans Am's personality perfectly complemented his own on-screen presence. Every chase scene, every narrow escape, every moment of swagger was amplified by the presence of this magnificent machine. The impact of Smokey and the Bandit on Pontiac sales and American car culture was absolutely enormous. In the year following the film's release, Pontiac's sales increased by over 40%, a staggering number that reflected the phenomenon that Reynolds and the Trans Am had created. Across the country, people lined up to see the movie, and many of them left the theater with one thought in their heads: They wanted to drive a Pontiac Trans Am exactly like the one Burt Reynolds had driven on screen. The film wasn't just a commercial success. It was a cultural touchstone that defined an entire era of American cinema and automotive enthusiasm. What made the pairing of Burt Reynolds and the 1977 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am so absolutely perfect was the way they complemented each other. Reynolds brought his signature charm, confidence, and physical charisma to the role of the Bandit, while the Trans Am brought raw power, distinctive style, and undeniable presence to every scene. Together they created a cinematic moment that transcended film and entered the realm of pure pop culture phenomenon. The Trans Am became so closely associated with Reynolds that to this day, decades after the film was released, the incredible success of Smokey and the Bandit almost immediately led to discussions about a sequel, and in 1980, Burt Reynolds returned to his role as the Bandit for Smokey and the Bandit 2. While the original film had captured lightning in a bottle, the sequel attempted to recapture that magic with an even more ambitious storyline. This time, the Bandit was tasked with transporting an elephant from Miami to Dallas in just 48 hours, an absurdist premise that somehow worked within the film's universe of over-the-top action and comedy. For the sequel, Pontiac provided an updated version of the iconic Trans Am, the 1978 Pontiac Trans Am SE. While the difference between the 1977 and 1978 models might seem subtle to casual observers, automotive enthusiasts immediately recognized the upgrades and refinements. The 1978 model featured a redesigned front bumper, updated interior styling, and enhanced performance capabilities. More importantly, though, it maintained the same aggressive styling and commanding presence that had made the original Trans Am so iconic in the first place. The 1978 Pontiac Trans Am SE was, in many ways, a refinement of its predecessor. Pontiac had listened to feedback from drivers and critics, and they incorporated improvements designed to enhance both performance and comfort. The SE model specifically targeted buyers who wanted luxury features alongside genuine performance capability. With available options like leather upholstery, upgraded sound systems, and more powerful engine configurations, the Trans Am SE represented the evolution of the Trans Am line, while still maintaining its core identity as a no-nonsense performance machine. When Reynolds climbed behind the wheel of the 1978 Pontiac Trans Am SE for Smokey and the Bandit 2, audiences immediately recognized this vehicle as an evolution of the original. The Trans Am had become so iconic by this point that its presence alone signaled to viewers that they were about to experience another wild adventure. The sequel wasn't as culturally impactful as the original. No film could have matched the phenomenon that Smokey and the Bandit had created. But it demonstrated that audiences still loved the Bandit and his machine. What's particularly interesting about Smokey and the Bandit the Sun is that it showcased how the Trans Am had already become part of American mythology. The car wasn't just a vehicle anymore. It was a character with its own identity and presence. Reynolds understood this intuitively, and he used the Trans Am as a vehicle for exploring different aspects of his character and the humor that audiences loved. The sequel also demonstrated that the combination of Reynolds, the Trans Am, and high-speed chases across American highways had become a formula that audiences couldn't resist, even if the original magic was somewhat diluted in the follow-up. When you step back and examine Burt Reynolds' entire body of work and his relationship with automobiles, what emerges is a fascinating portrait of how film, celebrity, and consumer culture intersect. Reynolds didn't just drive cars in movies. He transformed ordinary vehicles into objects of desire and fascination. More importantly, he demonstrated an understanding that automobiles could be used as tools for character development, visual storytelling, and cultural commentary. The vehicles Reynolds drove throughout his career served multiple purposes simultaneously. On the most basic level, they were practical machines that allowed the character to accomplish their missions, escaping, chasing, competing. But on a deeper level, these vehicles communicated information about the characters Reynolds played. The worn Ford Custom 500 suggested authenticity and survival. The sophisticated Citroën SM hinted at education and refinement. The eye-catching Trans Am broadcast confidence and dangerous charisma. Each vehicle was carefully chosen to reinforce the personality and motivations of the character Reynolds was portraying. Beyond the immediate impact on film and entertainment, Reynolds' relationship with automobiles had profound effects on American car culture and purchasing decisions. The phenomenon surrounding Smokey and the Bandit and the Trans Am is perhaps the most obvious example, but the influence extended far. What Reynolds understood, perhaps better than any other actor of his era, was that automobiles held a special place in the American imagination. Cars represented freedom, power, individual identity, and the open road. They symbolized possibility and rebellion against conformity. Reynolds' genius was in recognizing that by aligning himself with vehicles that embodied these qualities, he could amplify his own on-screen presence and create moments of cinema that would endure in popular memory for decades to come. Reynolds' influence on how vehicles are portrayed in film and television cannot be overstated. Before Reynolds, cars in movies were often just transportation. After Reynolds, vehicles became characters themselves, extensions of the protagonist's personality, visual representations of their values and aspirations. Directors and cinematographers learned from Reynolds' example that cars could be more than just practical elements of a story. They could be storytelling devices in themselves. The way a character drives, the attention paid to the vehicle's aesthetics and capabilities, the relationship between actor and machine. These elements all became part of the vocabulary of action cinema, partly because of what Burt Reynolds had demonstrated. The cultural phenomenon that Reynolds created extended beyond just the films themselves. It influenced how manufacturers thought about marketing and branding. It showed that a single film appearance could drive consumer demand in ways that traditional advertising couldn't match. Pontiac, Ford, and other manufacturers began to understand the value of having their vehicles featured prominently in major motion pictures, particularly when those films starred charismatic actors like Burt Reynolds. This understanding eventually evolved into the modern practice of product placement, where manufacturers actively seek out roles in films and television shows to showcase their vehicles to target audiences. When you think about Burt Reynolds' legacy, it's impossible to separate the man from the machines he drove. These weren't just coincidental pairings in films, they were central to what made Reynolds such a compelling and iconic figure in American popular culture. The 1971 Ford Custom 500 established him as an action star, willing to embrace gritty authenticity. The 1973 Citroën SM proved his range and sophistication. The 1978 Dodge van in Cannonball Run demonstrated his willingness to embrace comedy and absurdity. The 1977 and 1978 Pontiac Trans Ams became the most iconic vehicles in his filmography, defining not just his career, but an entire era of American cinema. And the 1983 Ford Thunderbird showed his ability to adapt as times changed. Together, these vehicles tell the story of Burt Reynolds' evolution as an actor and his understanding of how to use visual elements to enhance storytelling. They demonstrate his keen instincts about what would resonate with audiences and his willingness to take risks with unconventional pairings. Most importantly, they show how a single actor's charisma and intelligence in selecting roles and vehicles could influence American culture on a massive scale. The cars that Burt Reynolds made famous have become immortal in their own right. They transcend their original mechanical purposes and become symbols of an era, artifacts of a time when American cinema was at its most vibrant and when Hollywood action heroes could define the dreams and desires of an entire nation. From the worn authenticity of the Ford Custom 500 to the aggressive machismo of the Trans Am, each vehicle carries with it the imprint of Reynolds' presence and personality. These machines have become as much a part of cinema history as the films themselves, and they continue to inspire appreciation and nostalgia among car enthusiasts and film lovers alike. Now that you've seen the incredible journey of Burt Reynolds and the legendary vehicles he made famous, we want to hear from you. Head down to the comment section and tell us, what's your favorite Burt Reynolds film, and which of these iconic cars would you most want to own? Was it the rebellious power of the Pontiac Trans Am that captured your imagination? The quirky charm of the Dodge van? Or maybe you have a soft spot for one of the earlier vehicles that helped establish Reynolds as an action star. We genuinely want to know what resonates with you and what draws you back to these films and vehicles time and time again. If you enjoyed this exploration of Burt Reynolds and the cars that became synonymous with his legendary career, make sure you subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into Hollywood history, automotive culture, and the fascinating intersections between cinema and the vehicles that captured our collective imagination.